Hey everyone, it's Anil again, and joined with Indira Kennedy. Hey Indira, how are you?
I'm great. Good. We just had a lovely discussion and we're ready for this, aren't we?
We totally are. I mean, we've been talking for just over an hour now, and we've been talking about a couple of different things. And something I had to be open with Indira at the start of the call was how a chat she and I had 2 weeks ago, um, changed my life in a matter of 2 weeks. And we're going to talk a bit more about it here shortly. But kind of what we were going to focus on today is the power of self-forgiveness and how that has the ability to release, create, almost recharge your inner energy. Because I think a lot of us feel certain things, both positive and negative, good, bad, and that can really start to weigh on us. And I think it's amazing how there is an ability within us to self-forgive. And by doing that, we're able to almost, again, release energy and feel amazing. And so Indira, I think on the start of this, I know you're in the process of writing a book, which I'm really excited. She's actually shared an extract, so I've been reading aspects of it. But one of the elements that we talk about in the book is around energy. And I want to get to that here in a bit on how self-forgiveness leads to that release of energy. But one thing you talk about is the definition of self, because we hear that a lot: self-reliance, self-assurance, self-forgiveness. What is your personal definition of self?
Oh gosh, it's a big one to try to define, but from my own practices and experience of particularly through the 8 elements that we talk about, of which are essentially spiritual practices that allow me to go deeper into who I really am, then that feeling of when I know that I'm in contact with, I'm aligned with my deeper self with a capital S, that's really my own higher self, my own divine self, if you like, that is beyond anything that's worldly. That's the eternal part of who we are. And it's an incredibly conscious, loving, unconditionally loving aspect of me. So the self with a small s is more the ego, who we are as our everyday, daily, physical being. But I think of that more as the small self, the one that's probably not quite so, doesn't remember necessarily that in fact I am great, that I am divine, that I am eternal and all-knowing, and all the great attributes that come with that. And I know that for some people that might kind of shake their paradigm of who or how they think about themselves, but it's definitely mine, and that comes from Eastern tradition and the practice of it, because I say that having felt what that is and being in that space and recognizing when it's in charge. And we talked about 3 voices last time we spoke. So, we have the 3 voices of our thoughts that are just babbling on at literally 500 words per minute, that we can get hooked into and think it's all real and start telling stories and make up more stories. We have the voice of our beliefs that says, oh, it shouldn't be like this, or I'm just like that because, and of course it'll be our truths. The beliefs are obviously positive truths as well. But we can get caught in the deceptive brain messages and the conditioning from our past and how we were raised and the stories we're making up from events that we've gone through. So we sort of make a way of dealing with the world and all the chaos and the massiveness of our life by creating beliefs. So they're very useful. However, they're still not really who we are at our deeper self. So the voice of the self with a capital S is the wise one, is the one that says, you might be going down the wrong path right now. This doesn't, and it'll actually tell us, people talk about their intuition or gut feeling, or something just says, don't do this right now. That's coming from a much deeper place. That's coming from the all-seeing, all-knowing that says, might not be a great thing to do. And actually, a story you don't know is, thinking about this, was I was in coaching training actually with a guy who had been an SAS, and he was describing how he was out on an actual military event, on some remote island, a place they just did not know, and literally enemy right there. So in full force with war. And he was leading his small group of men, and suddenly something just stopped him in his tracks and essentially said, don't go any further, just stopped him. And he said, he told everyone to back up. He listened and took notice and told everyone to back up and go the other direction, and then discovered later that there had been a landmine right in that
No
spot.
way.
So yeah, and the enemy were on the other side. In fact, it was the enemy that caught the landmine.
No
So,
way. Wow.
so you know, a phenomenal story where, and this is where we all have it. It's not necessarily a feminine thing, you know, that the men and women, we equally have those moments. And I'm sure there's so many millions of stories where people will say, I was stopped from doing something and I don't know who stopped me. You know, that to me is your connection with something greater that is still you. It's still you.
So what's interesting to me about that is, thank you for sharing that, because that blew my mind. And pun not intended on that one, given that was a landmine that they found and walked away from. What's amazing about that is, like, we don't know what that voice is, or where we know where it came from. Obviously, it came from within us. We're kind of like, but we're not able to put our finger on it. Is it that wise self, you know, that is kind of like, hang on a second, something's not right here, something's amiss, you know? And I almost feel like at times we end up hearing more of that negative chatter. We hear more of that, those voices that actually, rather than steer us in the right way, they kind of steer us round and round in circles. And, you know, something that we spoke about is guilt and shame, and how that can slowly lead us down to, you know, if you have energy, these are just areas of, you know, guilt can take your energy level down, shame can take your energy level down, probably close to, I think you may have mentioned to me, to death. And I know that you've referred this in something you've been reading about, or you've read in the past, that shame is the next thing to death. In terms of, can you elaborate a bit more on that, and how maybe where that negative voice comes in versus that wise voice?
Sure. I mean, I'm using a scale that came from a book by Dr. David Hawkins, who unfortunately has passed on now. Lots of great YouTubes, and he's written some fabulous books. But Power versus Force, The Hidden Determinants of Human Behaviour, has a scale that he uses, a logarithmic scale of 0 to 1,000, that really describes how we generate energy. And we've got to recognise that we are energy. We're like big batteries. We store energy, we produce energy, we get depleted, like we are force fields, right? So he talks about then how emotion and our view of life can either generate energy, or it can deplete and suck energy out of the system. And so the more that we focus on those more negative kind of feelings, the more we're dropping our energy, and the more we will look to find energy from others. So we all know how people kind of, there's some who just, you're drained speaking to them, you're drained being around them, because they've latched onto your energy somehow, and or you can feel how depleted they are, and they're like a black hole. They're just sucking energy from you into them, or they're taking energy out of the system. So he also relates it to politics and religion and all sorts of aspects of our life, where we can see it in some leaders, that it's all about force. So it's as if they're not generating energy, they're just trying to get energy. So they'll do it by force, they're taking energy, rather than it being an uplifting and inspiring insightful, compassionate, loving person. And all of those qualities are generating energy. They're energy birthing properties, right? So, and he talks about the point where we flip over from draining energy is the line of courage. And it takes a lot of courage for us to decide, I'm not going to feel this way anymore. I'm not going to allow others to make me feel this way. That I want to live with greater joy, peace, equanimity, acceptance, love, you know, and ultimately, of course, so his scale is enlightenment is at the top.
Yeah.
Where we're really living with that sense of self and pure consciousness. And at 20, this is where shame comes in, because this is where our view is that God or source or consciousness is despising of us rather than all loving, you know, like my life is terrible and I'm actually not a worthy being and I'm not loved by the eternal, you know.
Yeah.
So it's a total misunderstanding of that aspect of life, as in, you know, the self is all loving and wants the very best for us, and it will stop that man from standing on a landmine and taking his men with him if that's the right thing to be doing right then. And, you know, and it sits with having a fairly miserable view of life. David says, you know, life for you is miserable. It's generating very little energy at all. The emotion is humiliation, and the process is elimination. So essentially, when we get into shame, which a lot of us can experience it at any one time and use to try and control others, essentially what we're doing is trying to eliminate that person, or even feel that we're being eliminated, or we'll eliminate ourselves. And some people, you know, many people, when they suicide, it's from shame.
Yeah.
So this is why I said to you recently, you know, shame is the closest thing to death when it comes to energy, because if you're barely generating energy, how are you alive? You know, like you're breathing, but it's not life, it's not living. So
it's almost your energy's depleted. I find that interesting, because I want to go back and then I want to share an example and kind of give context to what I mentioned at the start, where you changed my life in 2 weeks with this idea and this concept. You know, we think about energy givers and energy takers. So that's external, and we've talked about this before, right? External versus internal. So there are external factors, influences, people, doubters, that will suck the energy out of you, right? Like you said, latch on, whether they mean to or not, by making you feel guilty, by making you feel shamed. That's all external. And you know, it blows my mind that we give people that space to do that. But there's some, I'm sure, you know, obviously there's a clear psychology behind it, but you know, why we allow that to happen. You then flip it to the internal, and how the self, the wise one, is meant to be that positive voice that steers you clear, but yet there's that inner voice that may actually drain you as well, pick away at you, take away at you. And almost like you mentioned, if someone externally not lowering your energy levels, internally you're probably festering on something, or you know, there's internal chatter. We've talked about saboteurs, we've talked about all that, those negative voices that can
inner critique.
Inner critique, yeah, like, you know, you should be your biggest cheerleader, not your biggest critique. And I think that's something where, you know, that inner self can get weakened, you know, and by weakening it, by feeling shame, by feeling guilt, you drain your energy. And like you said, you're close to death, because you don't have that energy to be courageous, to be above the line, and move forward. I mean, I'm keen on your thoughts there. And then I do want to share the personal and the work story on this as well.
Sure, do. I know, you must. What comes to me about that is that it doesn't weaken the inner self. It never loses its power.
Okay.
It's just that we've moved away from it and covered it over again and forgotten. So it's really through our own forgetfulness and, as you say, allowing this situation or this person to then, the way we react is to drop our energy down. We agree with them in a sense by feeling shame, or that we've forgotten actually that we are great. And maybe we didn't do so well, and we need to look at that. But we don't have to go into self-deprecation over it. And I have to say, I had a really close friend who said to me one day, I will not let anyone keep me from my happiness.
Yes, I love that.
And at the time, I know when I tell the story, you get it. I can tell you get it. When I tell some people that, they think that's the most selfish thing they've ever heard.
Really?
When I heard it blew my mind. It was, wow, this person stands in his power and his self-worth. He knows who he is.
I mean, those words are so powerful.
Yeah. And he was right. He was, and I come back to it constantly. It was, I will not let anyone keep me from my happiness, because happiness is our inner state. That is the self. That's our bliss. You know, Joseph Campbell says, follow your bliss. That's what he's talking about.
I think and so kind of talking about internal bliss, and I think that's the ironic thing. I go back to, if no one else does, I am someone who in the past, present, and probably in the future, I do take away from my own happiness. And I'm gonna share two examples now on how I've done that, but how I've, to your point, kind of moved past that. And so there are two brief stories I'm going to share. One is, I've done a podcast a couple months back about my relationship with my mom, and it's been challenged, right? Whether someone can say, hey, you've got a bit of PTSD from your childhood, or from just your upbringing, or I just look at it as, I probably didn't have the best relationship with my mom growing up. And, but every day today, I want to love her more and more, because she's an amazing human being. She's absolutely pure. She's absolutely full of love. And so, I had a moment where I spoke to her 3 weeks ago, and I got really I almost physically I kind of made a fist. And I was like, I just felt really frustrated. And, even if she said the slightest thing, I kind of jumped on her. I mean, and that's not the type of feeling you want to have. And what I realized is there was a lot of guilt, whether, from treating my mom and speaking to my mom like that, and, wanting to be there for her when she calls, but at the same time, I'm feeling guilty, and then feeling ashamed of how I was speaking to her and how I was treating her. Because, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I want to preach one thing here, but then I don't want to practice another when it comes to my own mom. And so, after we spoke, I kind of thought about it, and it's like, well, I'm not uncomfortable with my mom. My mom may not have all the acumen and all her skills. She's older now, but I got on the phone with her last Thursday, and I was like, hey, Mom, just can I be open with you about how, I'm feeling sometimes when we talk? And, I'm sorry that I lose my patience, and I'm sorry that I get frustrated. And, after like a 30-minute conversation, she's like, okay, what should we do different? And to hear your mom say that, you're like, okay. And then, but for the last 7 days, it's been different. And the last couple conversations I've had with her, I felt incredibly light. I felt more energetic, I desire actually now I seek her out. I want to hear from her and how her day was, even if it's a brief chat. And, for me, it's moving from, having I feel like I depleted my energy. I was taking away from my happiness. And, my sister and my partner, Nika, I've chatted with both of them about it. And it's just amazing, Indira, how, I felt like zero energy. I felt flat, and that was not fun. I can hand over heart say that. And it's not the relationship I want to have. And now I'm hopeful that the last week has been this good, and I kind of want to build on it and kind of build the energy. And, yes, no one, not even myself, will hopefully take away from that happiness that I have now, and I want to continue to have with my mom.
Yeah. And you don't want to bring that person to her the next time.
No, not at all.
Because we know it's an absolute, from physics and quantum physics, we know like attracts like.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we know that being around people whose energy is really low, and when they don't have good self-worth, you know, you can see they're beating themselves up about something, that they don't have a good sense of self. It's almost open invitation to bring them down even more, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
pin the kick me sign on the back. And it's,
Like
but
you pasted it on yourself. It's like, you know, please, I insist.
you know their vulnerability, and know the weak spots, you know. So it doesn't allow for a greater conversation, and there's such a contrast when somebody is in that state and you're in a really happy state. I just drew a box for myself to remind myself about the dysfunctional box, because when you're in that state, you're actually in the dysfunctional box. You're not in that expansive greatness of your best and you at your best. You've jumped into, and you're asking the other person to get in with you, so that you can communicate and can connect, or they're refusing to, and then you're probably getting upset with them because they won't come in with you, or they've got to start trying to pull you out, and it's not communication, it's not love. But your mum expressed such love simply by saying, and faith in you and your relationship with her, by saying, okay, so what do we do differently? Yeah. That willingness, you know, that's above the line. Willingness is above the line. In fact, on the
I think when you have, like, both people are feeling willingness and above the line, that again, that just, yeah.
It's pretty high. It's a scale of 310 on this, on David Hawkins' scale. It's 310 for willingness. So it's pretty high, and so of course it's generating a possibility of having a much better relationship, because you're already above the line, and you're
it just grows, it multiplies. Hopefully it becomes like above the line, exponential growth, positive, you know.
And yet you seem so surprised when suddenly we get a great response, and it's so much better, and you're looking forward to, because it's all closer to love.
and it's so simple. And I do want to go back to something else we've spoken about, which is there's that, you know, everything's on a scale, like we said, you know, self-righteousness versus, you know, self-deprecation. You know, for the sake of conversation, let's say those are the two ends of our spectrum for now. And kind of like I always said, I don't want to be talking and sharing here and walking a path of self-righteousness and thinking, oh, I've got it all figured out. At the same time, I'm going to have moments where I'm going to probably eat away at myself and self-deprecate. You know, something I did at work this past week, I'm not proud of how I did it. And, you know, I reached out to some folks and I apologized. And I'm saying that wasn't the right thing for me to do. So rather than it taking control of me, I took control of it. And I think from what we spoke about, it's like self-forgiveness is what's allowed me in the scale of a week from self-righteous to self-deprecate to kind of come back into the middle. And, you know, that's taking control from within rather than being controlled from the outside, and just being aware was powerful. And, you know, I won't lie to you, literally I was walking home, I think it was Wednesday night, and I was just kind of, I can't believe I did that. And literally my energy level, embarrassment, shame, you know, and then, you know, sent the messages, apologized next day. And, you know, now I suddenly feel like lightened, but I took control of it. But, you know, and it's okay. Now it's my responsibility to make sure I don't go down that path again, whether it's self-deprecation or self-righteous, but just finding that balance in between.
And let it go. Just let it go.
Yeah.
You know, come back into the moment. I mean, the reason you didn't feel good was because somewhere in there your values kicked in, and you realized that you had violated your own values, and potentially violated you knew that you had disconnected from yourself. That's mostly what it's about. Is anything is really saying you just disconnected from your higher self. You forgot who you really were, and went into something else. So, oops, right, not going to do that again. Hope the impact wasn't too negative on others, because I would never want that.
Exactly.
And you've gone and asked them for forgiveness. You can't ever make someone forgive you. You can simply ask for forgiveness.
Truth.
It's up to them. But you can forgive yourself, and that wipes the slate clean.
It does.
So it's something else.
But you know, and it's funny. I think people may struggle with that, like, oh, self-forgiveness wipes the slate clean because, like, oh, it's done and dusted, and it's you move on. But it's yes, you do. But I think it's I do feel that, like you said, it's like you violated your values, and people that know you well, know your values, and knew that that wasn't you. They'll give you, they'll forgive you because they're like, look, acknowledge, appreciate you, acknowledge that. And some of the words that they shared back to me, I thought was just brilliant. Like you couldn't pray for, be grateful for the words that came back on it. And you just kind of like, okay, now, okay, I don't want to violate my values. I don't want to make them questionable, and I think, when you and I spoke earlier, said, values are the heart speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And like we always say, still mind, wise heart, that wise heart, you have to listen to it, and it wants to forgive you. It doesn't want you to be suffering in silence. So I think that's, I know you mentioned you've got 8 elements that you're writing about. There's a couple of them I'd love to be talking about today, but I think we're going to talk about them another time, because one of them is contemplation. I love that one as much as intention. But today we were talking about energy. And so how self-forgiveness can lead you to your life energy, how you can release energy, recharge. Maybe how do we want to bring it full circle, Indira, and kind of give some advice to folks that are both listening and watching to us?
Well, energy, you can choose how energized and what kind of energy you want to feel. I do quite a bit of work around presence, and I'm going to be doing some workshops on presence for women, and then another on presence in career. And for me, when we go deeper than presence being, it is our charisma, it is what we radiate to others, that others feel, because you can't help but feel that, because energy has different levels of vibration and frequency. We know that, the different waves. So when we go into low energy, it's literally low, slow frequency, it feels heavy. And when we're into more loving, uplifting, literally uplifting energy, it's going to be a much higher, finer vibration, and we feel better. Like we know this is who we are. And so for me, it's about finding the essence of your own energy. If you really thought about you at your best and you at your most loving and most compassionate, there is a feeling that comes with that. And when we sort of go into that more and feel what's my true essence, that is when we're connected to that all the time. That's the energy that we're generating, and what people feel when they're with us. Mm-hmm. So for some people, it'll be, I feel so calm when I'm around you. I feel warm when I'm around you. I feel like I just want to laugh when I'm around you, because it depends on the essence of that person and their energy. So how do you feel, and the frequency of that? So at the deepest, when I'm talking about presence, then it's not only how do I look, and what am I wearing, and how does my voice look, and what's the look on my face. All of that comes from being authentic about who you really are on the inside. So then I don't think we've talked about the 5 S's. There's all these different numbers of things, but essentially it's the space, the stillness, the silence, being able to be the witness, the seer of what's happening, and that all your senses are switched on. Mm-hmm. So that is what brings presence and brings you back into the energy of your own higher self. So of course, when we go into, instead of latching on with the ego or using ego to boost our energy, which is either one end of the seesaw is self-deprecation, which is what you were doing, and you've had the experience of how low your energy will drop. With those thoughts and those words, you were talking to yourself, you talked yourself into very low energy. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, we can try and boost it through boosting ourselves up, like self-righteousness. And I know I can fall into that one, and I have to catch myself. Oh, they should know better. I know better now, so I'll just tell them that they should know better. I'll teach them that. that self-righteousness, that's still ego, and it's still covering up our sense of unworthiness, really. It comes down to we've forgotten who we really are. So as you said, self-forgiveness is a lovely, the fulcrum point, the pivot that will help us come back to that really solid center again. And of course, that's going to reconnect us with our own special inner energy. So it's so then you find more energies available again to have more fun, and you've got more energy to get on with it, and you're not kind of battling or having to shield yourself from this whole mishmash of things you feel have built up over time, all the sins you've ever committed and all of the wrongdoing and all of the things that I shouldn't have done, that's all still ego as well. Your own higher self knows better than that.
It is. And I think, but it's interesting though, because again, it's exertion of energy, right? To shield yourself, to deplete yourself, to reassure yourself, to release yourself. Like, again, energy, I'm kind of curious. I don't know if there's something that anyone can prove that there's a finite amount of energy, or if energy is infinite. I'm probably a believer that energy is infinite. But at the same time, if you deplete, you go negative probably quicker than you can go super positive. I think that just to kind of wrap up the conversation for today, just because I feel like, again, we can always talk for hours. A couple points that I want to reflect on and kind of recap, and I'd love from the same from your side, Indira. So kind of first thing first, folks. So I think just some general advice. Like, I think that it's really important to, number one, be really aware of those voices in your mind, and be aware of how those voices, both external, but those ones internal, can drain you, right? And how you can actually feel guilt, you can feel shame, and that can slowly deplete you down to a point where you've got no energy. And I think, as Indira mentioned, I think it's really important to be aware of that. And then it's a matter of how do you turn that then into action. And I actually drew on my notepad here a 3D box, and I'm like the dysfunctional box. So, don't get lost in that. Don't find yourself, pull yourself out of that box. Like, again, not to say think outside the box, but pull yourself out of the box. I think it's a matter of then also finding and almost choosing your energy. I found that there are days where I've got heaps of energy physically, mentally, but not emotionally. And I kind of draw a petrol gauge, and I've done this before. I've mentioned about it too. I think knowing your energy level, and if your energy is depleted, that's one way of measuring it or showing, but understanding, but wait, why is my energy so low? There were days where I would do the petrol gauge and I would always be at half or a quarter. I was never always full. And I'm like, how do I, have days where I can actually go, I've started my day with a full tank. And so this is actually something I'm going to be thinking about kind of moving ahead. And then the power of self-forgiveness, like you said, it's that fulcrum point that kind of brings you back from being self-deprecating, self-righteous. So how you can almost calm yourself. And I love that. I think it's just, we shouldn't boost ourselves through being self-righteous, being hypocrites. We shouldn't boost or deplete ourselves by self-deprecating, even though I know that's a tendency. It's a cultural tendency. But I think, there's so much here, Indira. And I think just that personal example at work, the example with my mom, it just shows that if you just open up to it, what you can gain and how you can create and release that positive energy, I think it's like I said, it's limitless. What do you think?
Well, it is, because otherwise the whole of the universe is going to implode, isn't it? So, and we're all part of it. The same energy that creates all that creates us. So, of course, it's limitless. The thing that you mentioned about, good days, bad days with your energy is remembering that we've got these levels, the physical. You may just be tired physically.
Yeah.
We've talked about what food and addictions do around, sugar and just not managing ourselves, not drinking enough water, whatever, breathing deeply enough, all that. Yeah, I'm looking at my glass going, I'm going to drink the minute we get off the line. And emotionally as well, there may be things that are hurting our hearts, like we may be going through something, and we all have been through COVID, that our sense of humanity going through this, as much as what's happening to us personally, is going to affect our emotional energy. And then mentally, we've got the same. And a lot of what goes on for us at those other levels is because of what goes on in our mind. So Yale University studies showed that 40% of what impacts our happiness levels and our ability to be happy for longer is 40% of that is actually the things we think and the things we do. Only 10% are the events in our life, and the other 50% tends to be our genetic set point. So we do know that depression can be an inherited thing, but we also know genes get switched on and off. And so I don't believe we've got to be stuck with that. But I think I'm generally a very optimistic person. I like to be joyful and fun and playful. So that's my set point. Anything below that starts to feel like life's not so good. But for others, you know, their default mood might be just a pretty blur kind of thing, you know, and that's okay. So know kind of what your own set point is and if that's all right for you or not. But the 40% of the things that kind of impact on that happiness and the level of it, but also how long we can remain happy for, is to do with our thoughts and actions. So this is why we've got to go back all the time to the mind. The still mind allows the wise heart to speak. The still mind, the clear mind, question your thoughts. This is the three voices. Who am I listening to? What am I telling myself about this? You told yourself a pretty gruesome story about what you'd actually done by sending that text message that pulled you down. So forgiveness has to come from a very willing place to genuinely say, I will let go of this now. I forgive myself for my ignorance or for my fear, and bring your own loving self forward for yourself. You know, when you talked last time about being more self-loving and we need to love ourselves more. That's the moment when you know that you are that loving, wise advocate. It's not someone else, it's you. That part of you has to come forward. So I think this is the thing that's standing out for me at the moment behind all of this, is to remember that it's not something else. It's not someone else. It never goes away. That loving, unconditional, great source is you, self with the capital S. So we just forget and we cover it up, and it gets, so if we're kind of piling up all this rubbish, you know, the rubbish heap of the things that we've and still beat ourselves up for that, and we're adding to the rubbish heap every time we do it, it's going to get harder and harder to see that light that's in us, you know, and that great love that's there for us. So that's where your energy comes from.
I love the whole concept of the set point. I think that's brilliant. And it's something that I think we need to talk about another time, because I think that's something that people acknowledge. I think maybe we use the term, what's your baseline? And anything above that is, you know, you're great, you're happy, positive, you know, but that's your, and then you fall below it, you know, you're in trouble. You're in, you need to figure out kind of how do you get back above that line, that baseline or that set point. Indira, I want to say thank you again, because I always learn new things and amazing things from you. And I'm sure the next time we chat with a group, I'm gonna be like, you know, on the back of that chat we had, here's more that's come out of this. And I'm really excited to explore and understand each of the 8 elements that you've written about. Because one thing that's again stuck with me, as you said, is thoughts and actions. And I always think about thoughts and actions and intentions. And I know intentions is another element. So much more to come. But thank you for helping me, for helping us, and keen to chat more soon.
Absolutely. And I just want to acknowledge that hour we spent for this, because this is where we come up with what we want to say. But actually we dig deep, and it's our working contemplation that brings us forward. So wisdom gets to speak, and then we've got hopefully something really valuable to offer everybody else, because we've done a bit more work, you know. So it's progressing. But I just want to acknowledge too that the whole thing about action, because in the end, transformation only comes through doing. It's a practice and not a theory. and what you demonstrated with your two examples in your life in the last 2 weeks. And I could see the change in you when we got online this morning. I said that to you. You look different.
True. True.
Was all of that weight had been lifted off. But the thing is, you took action. So whilst we can, you know, think about the physical, emotional, and mental, in the end, we need to take that wisdom and say, all right, so what will we do? What will I do differently now? What will I do about that? Self-forgiveness is a great antidote and a great kind of release. But then it's, how will I apply this in my life from now on? So that's the bit that really matters. And the work I do in corporate is always, how are you going to embed this now? You know, like, how will you apply
How will you use it?
How will you use it and apply
Make it part of you.
Yeah.
I totally agree, because it's one thing to hear it and experience it, but if it doesn't become part of you slowly but surely over time, I think it can have a far greater impact, a more powerful impact on you, on us, if it becomes practice.
Yeah.
More than just
that's all the whole ritual routine thing we talk about as well. Anyway,
something we also need to talk about, rituals versus habits. Are they one and the same? So yeah, more to come on that. The next week. No, love it.
Really
hey, thank you so
fun.
much.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
I love it. And hey, I believe in you. Everyone should believe in themselves. And big hugs. Chat with you all later.
All right.
Thanks, Indira.
Bye. See you.